The Middle East is once again at the epicenter of a global crisis as U.S. President Donald Trump issues a chilling warning to Iran, threatening widespread strikes on key energy infrastructure and strategic facilities if a diplomatic resolution is not achieved shortly. In a world already on edge from months of escalating tensions, this new declaration has sent shockwaves through financial markets, political circles, and international security agencies. Analysts note that the stakes have never been higher. The Strait of Hormuz, a critical artery through which nearly a fifth of the world's oil flows, is now at the center of a potentially catastrophic standoff. Trump's statement, delivered via social media and further amplified in interviews, emphasized that the U.S. could target not only oil installations, but also essential facilities that sustain water and energy supplies. While framed as a means of applying pressure on Tehran, the implications for civilians, regional allies, and global trade are immense, igniting fears that any misstep could escalate into a broader conflict. Meanwhile, the situation on the ground is rapidly deteriorating. Iran, asserting its own military capabilities, has struck a water and electricity plant in Kuwait, sending a stark signal that retaliatory measures are already underway. At the same time, an oil refinery in Israel came under attack, intensifying the perception that the war is spreading beyond traditional battle zones. Military experts point out that these attacks are not random. They are highly calculated moves designed to disrupt supply chains and project power. For global observers, the unfolding scenario presents a dizzying challenge: how to balance deterrence, diplomacy, and defense in a region where every action has immediate international consequences. The fragile balance between diplomacy and military escalation is being tested daily, with U.S. troops being deployed in larger numbers across strategic points in the Middle East. This increase in presence, combined with a public narrative of progress in negotiations, creates a complex messaging landscape where statements of peace are juxtaposed against stark warnings of destruction. Financial markets have responded swiftly to these developments. Brent crude, the global benchmark for oil, surged past $115 per barrel, reflecting concerns over supply disruptions in the Gulf. Investors are closely watching every missile launch, airstrike, and political statement, aware that energy markets are highly sensitive to developments in the Strait of Hormuz. Analysts note that sustained attacks on energy infrastructure not only threaten short-term supply, but also undermine long-term investor confidence, potentially triggering ripple effects across global economies. Simultaneously, global stock markets remain jittery, with cautious gains offset by persistent fears of a protracted conflict. The intersection of military escalation, strategic signaling, and market volatility creates a feedback loop in which every headline has the potential to move billions of dollars across global markets. On the humanitarian front, civilians in the region are already experiencing the consequences of intensified conflict. In Iranian cities like Karaj, residents report power outages and widespread disruption following nearby strikes on energy facilities. "I was really scared," one 22-year-old resident shared anonymously, describing the uncertainty and fear gripping communities. Such accounts underscore the human dimension of this crisis. Beyond strategic calculations and geopolitical maneuvering, ordinary people are facing immediate risks to their daily lives. Hospitals, schools, and public infrastructure are increasingly vulnerable, raising urgent questions about the protection of civilians under international law. Legal experts emphasize that while military operations can target strategic assets, causing excessive harm to civilians could cross thresholds recognized as violations of conflict norms. Amid the escalating drama, the international community watches with heightened concern. Allies in the Gulf, including Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Kuwait, have already intercepted missile attacks, signaling that the crisis could rapidly expand beyond Iran and Israel. Regional leaders are calling for guarantees that future strikes will not endanger civilian populations or critical trade routes. Diplomats, meanwhile, are scrambling to mediate, seeking to prevent further escalation while recognizing that the window for de-escalation may be closing quickly. With U.S. troops mobilized, Iranian retaliatory measures underway, and key global resources at stake, the situation remains highly fluid, unpredictable, and potentially transformative for international politics, trade, and security. The ongoing conflict is quickly escalating into a multi-front regional crisis, with Iran, the U.S., and Israel each asserting military pressure while civilian populations brace for the worst. Iranian forces have demonstrated their ability to project power across borders, launching attacks on vital infrastructure in Gulf states such as Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, as well as strategic sites in Israel. These strikes have targeted power plants, desalination facilities, and oil refineries, highlighting Iran's strategic intent to leverage both military and economic tools to influence the course of the war. Observers note that targeting such infrastructure has immediate consequences, not only causing local disruption, but also threatening global energy supply chains that millions of people around the world depend on. Meanwhile, Israel and the U.S. have responded with air operations against Tehran and other Iranian cities, focusing on military installations, research centers, and logistics hubs. The combination of Iranian retaliation and allied strikes creates a dangerous cycle of escalation, where each action is carefully calculated to signal strength yet carries the risk of broader, unintended consequences. Political messaging has become as critical as battlefield operations in this crisis. President Donald Trump continues to project confidence in diplomatic progress, emphasizing that great progress is being made in negotiations, while simultaneously threatening to broaden U.S. strikes if demands are not met. At the same time, Iranian leadership, including Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Kalibaf, has portrayed American overtures as a pretext for deeper military involvement, framing the U.S. as an aggressor seeking to assert dominance in the Gulf. This clash of narratives complicates diplomatic channels and makes it increasingly difficult for mediators to identify points of genuine compromise. Even as Pakistan, Turkey, and other regional actors attempt to facilitate talks, both sides are simultaneously preparing for intensified operations, demonstrating the tension between public diplomacy and private military readiness. Analysts warn that such dual-track strategies, talks in one hand, threats and mobilization in the other, can heighten mistrust and increase the likelihood of miscalculations with severe consequences. The humanitarian toll of this conflict is rapidly mounting. In Iran, residents report extended power outages and disrupted access to water and essential services due to strikes on energy and desalination infrastructure. Casualties are increasing across the region. In Gulf Arab countries, missile interceptions and attacks have injured dozens, while in Israel, missile strikes have caused civilian casualties and property damage. Beyond immediate harm, these disruptions have long-term implications for public health, education, and economic stability. Families face uncertainty regarding access to safe drinking water, electricity, and food supplies, all of which are critical to sustaining life amid ongoing hostilities. The psychological impact is equally significant, as residents experience the stress of living under constant threat while infrastructure systems remain vulnerable. International law experts emphasize that targeting civilian infrastructure, even indirectly, can pose serious legal and ethical challenges, highlighting the fine line between military necessity and humanitarian protection. The economic ramifications are also profound. Global oil markets are reacting sharply to the uncertainty surrounding the Strait of Hormuz, with Brent crude prices climbing above $115 per barrel, reflecting fears of supply disruptions. Even short-term interruptions in shipping and energy production have global consequences, affecting everything from gasoline prices in the U.S. to fertilizer and natural gas availability worldwide. Investors and policymakers alike are monitoring every missile launch, airstrike, and diplomatic development, aware that market volatility could intensify if the conflict persists. Analysts warn that prolonged instability in the region could exacerbate inflationary pressures, disrupt supply chains, and create broader economic shocks, particularly for countries dependent on Gulf oil exports. The human toll of these operations is mounting rapidly. In Iran, residents in cities like Karaj and Tehran report hours-long blackouts, disruptions in access to clean water, and widespread fear as explosions echo through urban centers. Hospitals, schools, and community centers are increasingly vulnerable to the indirect consequences of attacks on energy and water systems. In Gulf states, missile interceptions and strikes have resulted in both civilian casualties and widespread panic, with thousands of people temporarily displaced or forced to seek shelter. Lebanon, where Israel is battling Hezbollah, has seen hundreds of thousands of civilians uprooted due to continuous strikes. UN peacekeeping missions report fatalities among personnel and mounting pressure to safeguard both civilians and operational assets. The human dimension of the crisis is further compounded by psychological stress as communities live under constant threat with limited access to basic necessities, highlighting the profound and often underreported costs of modern warfare. Economically, the war is straining global systems in ways that reach far beyond the region. The strategic choke point of the Strait of Hormuz, through which a significant portion of the world's oil supply passes, remains under threat. Any disruption to shipping or production could exacerbate already high energy prices, with Brent crude trading above $115 per barrel and fears of further escalation pushing volatility even higher. Analysts warn that continued instability in the Gulf could trigger ripple effects across global supply chains, impacting oil, natural gas, fertilizer, and other critical commodities. Beyond energy, financial markets are reacting with caution as investors weigh geopolitical risk against global economic recovery efforts. This combination of military, humanitarian, and economic pressures has created a precarious environment in which every strike, negotiation, or statement has amplified consequences on a global scale. The diplomatic landscape is equally fraught. While President Donald Trump claims progress in negotiations with Iranian officials, Tehran dismisses these talks, describing U.S. proposals as unrealistic and excessive. Regional powers, including Turkey and Pakistan, are attempting to mediate, yet their efforts face obstacles from both public posturing and private military planning by the involved nations. Gulf states, such as the UAE and Saudi Arabia, are demanding guarantees that future strikes will not target civilian populations or disrupt trade routes. NATO allies and international observers remain engaged, closely monitoring missile launches and regional military deployments, aware that missteps could escalate into a broader conflict affecting multiple continents. Diplomacy is under pressure as high-stakes negotiations compete with military action, creating a delicate balance that could easily tip into full-scale war. The broader geopolitical implications are significant. The United States, Iran, Israel, and Gulf states are all demonstrating strategic assertiveness, while regional actors like Hezbollah, Yemen's Houthi rebels, and neighboring countries like Turkey and Pakistan navigate the crisis carefully. The war is not only testing military strength, but also political credibility, alliances, and global influence. Analysts caution that prolonged hostilities could reshape regional power dynamics, disrupt international energy markets, and set new precedents for the conduct of modern warfare, particularly regarding attacks on civilian infrastructure. The consequences of this conflict will be felt far beyond the Middle East, affecting energy security, global trade, and international relations for years to come. Finally, the stakes for civilian populations cannot be overstated. Access to food, clean water, electricity, and healthcare is under strain, and the psychological impact of living amid continuous strikes and uncertainty is profound. Families face immediate risks, from falling debris and blackouts to long-term disruptions in education and public services. International humanitarian organizations are calling for urgent intervention and assistance, emphasizing the critical need for safe corridors, evacuation plans, and emergency support. The combination of military escalation, political maneuvering, and humanitarian crises creates a multidimensional challenge, one that will require sustained international attention to prevent a catastrophic humanitarian disaster. The coming days and weeks are critical as both sides continue to project power, negotiate under duress, and prepare for what could become one of the most consequential conflicts of the decade. As the war intensifies, the world is witnessing an unprecedented convergence of military escalation, energy insecurity, and regional instability, with implications that extend far beyond the Middle East. Iran's repeated strikes on key energy and water infrastructure in Gulf states like Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, combined with missile attacks intercepted over Dubai and other strategic locations, underscore Tehran's capability to influence not only the regional balance of power but also global economic stability. In parallel, Israel and the U.S. continue air operations targeting Iranian military installations, research centers, and petrochemical facilities, striking a delicate balance between tactical objectives and the risk of civilian casualties. Experts highlight that targeting infrastructure, while legally complex under international norms, is a strategic choice aimed at limiting Iran's ability to project power, disrupt regional logistics, and maintain operational readiness. However, these actions carry enormous risks, including unintended civilian harm, the escalation of retaliatory strikes, and the potential for a larger regional conflagration that could destabilize energy markets and trade routes globally. The stakes could not be higher, as the Strait of Hormuz, a critical artery for global oil shipments, remains a potential flashpoint that could trigger worldwide economic disruption if blockades or attacks occur. Global financial markets are responding sharply to the uncertainty. Brent crude has surged past $115 per barrel, reflecting fears of disrupted energy flows and a potential long-term energy crisis. Traders and policymakers are acutely aware that even short-term interruptions in supply from the Gulf region can create ripple effects across transportation, industrial production, and commodity markets. Oil prices remain highly sensitive to geopolitical developments, with every missile launch, airstrike, or political statement fueling volatility. Analysts warn that prolonged conflict could exacerbate global inflation, disrupt supply chains for essential commodities, and further strain economies that are still recovering from recent crises. Energy-dependent nations, including the United States, Japan, and European states, are closely monitoring the situation, evaluating strategic reserves, and considering contingency plans to mitigate the impact of potential disruptions in oil and natural gas supplies. This economic uncertainty amplifies the broader consequences of the war, highlighting how regional military operations can have a cascading effect on global markets and energy security. On the ground, civilians continue to bear the brunt of escalating hostilities. In Iran, residents report extended power outages, water shortages, and widespread fear as nearby strikes on energy and industrial facilities shake cities like Tehran and Karaj. Schools, hospitals, and residential areas face mounting vulnerability, forcing local governments and humanitarian organizations to scramble to provide emergency services. In Lebanon, where Israeli operations are focused on dismantling Hezbollah's command infrastructure, civilians have been displaced by the thousands, while casualties continue to rise in both urban and rural areas. UN peacekeeping forces have reported fatalities, including personnel from Indonesia, illustrating the direct dangers faced by international actors trying to maintain stability in conflict zones. The psychological and social impact of continuous bombardment is profound, with communities living under near constant threat and experiencing uncertainty about their access to basic necessities. Experts warn that prolonged exposure to such stressors can lead to long-term societal trauma, compounding the immediate effects of physical destruction. Diplomatic efforts are under immense strain. While President Donald Trump asserts that negotiations with Iranian officials are progressing, Tehran continues to reject these claims, calling U.S. proposals unrealistic and excessive. Regional actors like Turkey, Pakistan, and other international mediators are attempting to bridge the gap, but the simultaneous escalation of military operations undermines trust and complicates diplomatic channels. Gulf states, particularly the UAE and Saudi Arabia, have demanded guarantees that their populations and critical infrastructure will not be targeted, emphasizing the need for enforceable agreements. NATO allies and international observers are monitoring missile threats and regional military deployments, aware that any misstep could rapidly escalate the conflict into a full-scale regional war. The situation highlights the fragility of diplomacy in a high-stakes environment, where each side uses both public statements and military positioning to reinforce strategic objectives. The humanitarian dimension of this crisis cannot be overstated. Millions of people are living under constant threat of missile strikes, blackouts, and disrupted access to essential services like water, electricity, and healthcare. Displacement is widespread, particularly in Lebanon, and communities face the immediate challenge of survival amidst chaos. International organizations are calling for emergency aid, safe evacuation corridors, and protective measures to shield civilians from ongoing attacks. The war has revealed the difficulty of balancing military objectives with the protection of human life, as both sides navigate the blurred lines between tactical necessity and humanitarian responsibility. Analysts warn that failure to prioritize civilian protection could have lasting consequences for international norms, regional stability, and the credibility of mediating nations. This multi-layered crisis, spanning military escalation, energy insecurity, economic volatility, and humanitarian catastrophe, demands urgent international attention. With Iran, Israel, and the U.S. projecting power across multiple fronts, the situation remains unpredictable and highly dangerous. The next phase of the conflict could redefine regional dynamics, alter global energy markets, and challenge the international community's capacity to respond to large-scale crises. Civilians, governments, and markets alike are holding their breath, awaiting either a breakthrough in diplomacy or the next series of strikes that could escalate the war even further. The world watches closely, aware that decisions made in the coming days could have ramifications for years to come, both in the Middle East and across the globe. As the conflict edges toward a potentially catastrophic crescendo, the global stakes have never been higher. The ongoing war between the U.S., Iran, and Israel has transformed into a multidimensional crisis, combining military escalation, economic upheaval, and humanitarian disaster. Iran's precision strikes on vital Gulf infrastructure, including power plants, desalination facilities, and oil hubs, demonstrate its capacity to disrupt regional and global stability. At the same time, Israel and U.S. forces are conducting targeted operations across Tehran and other strategic Iranian cities, striking military research centers, petrochemical complexes, and logistical hubs with the aim of weakening Iran's operational capabilities. The combination of Iranian retaliation and allied counterstrikes is creating a cycle of action and reaction, where each escalation risks drawing the entire region and beyond into deeper instability. Analysts warn that the next miscalculation could spark a wider confrontation, one with ramifications for energy markets, international trade, and global security. Energy markets are already feeling the reverberations. Brent crude remains above $115 per barrel, reflecting anxiety over the security of the Strait of Hormuz and the global oil supply. Even temporary disruptions in this critical maritime corridor could send shockwaves through international energy networks, impacting transportation, manufacturing, and commodity prices worldwide. Natural gas, fertilizer, and other essential commodities are also at risk, threatening both domestic economies and global markets. Governments and multinational corporations are scrambling to adjust contingency plans, while investors react nervously to the volatility, aware that a prolonged conflict could escalate inflationary pressures and trigger a broader economic crisis. The interconnectedness of modern economies means that a localized war in the Middle East can ripple across continents, affecting lives far removed from the battlefield. Humanitarian concerns remain dire. Millions of civilians in Iran, Lebanon, Israel, and Gulf countries are facing blackouts, water shortages, displacement, and the psychological toll of living under constant threat. In Tehran, residents report extended outages and disruption of essential services, while in Lebanon, hundreds of thousands have fled southern cities under continuous bombardment. UN peacekeepers have suffered casualties, highlighting the dangers even for those tasked with maintaining stability. Hospitals, schools, and public facilities struggle to remain operational, and international aid agencies are calling for immediate relief efforts. The challenge is immense: how to mitigate civilian suffering while military operations continue, especially as both sides leverage infrastructure and urban areas for strategic advantage. Experts caution that failure to address humanitarian needs could deepen societal trauma and complicate post-war recovery for years. Diplomatic negotiations are teetering on a knife edge. President Donald Trump insists that talks are underway with Iranian officials, yet Tehran has dismissed these efforts, labeling U.S. demands as unrealistic and excessive. Regional mediators, such as Turkey and Pakistan, attempt shuttle diplomacy under extremely tense conditions, while Gulf nations demand enforceable guarantees against further attacks on civilians or vital infrastructure. NATO allies monitor missile threats and regional military movements closely, understanding that missteps could trigger broader involvement or an even more devastating conflict. Analysts warn that diplomacy will only succeed if paired with credible deterrence measures and mutual recognition of the catastrophic consequences of continued escalation. The geopolitical stakes could reshape the region for decades. The war has already tested alliances, exposed vulnerabilities in civilian infrastructure, and triggered energy market volatility worldwide. Iran, Israel, and the U.S. are maneuvering not only for military advantage, but also for political influence, signaling that the resolution of this conflict will have lasting implications for regional balance of power, global trade routes, and international norms regarding warfare. The involvement of groups like Hezbollah, Houthi rebels, and Gulf actors underscores the multi-layered complexity of the crisis, where local, regional, and international players are all intricately connected. Every missile, every airstrike, and every negotiation carries a weight far greater than immediate tactical gains. It may determine the political and economic landscape of the Middle East for years to come. For civilians, policymakers, and global observers alike, the message is clear: the coming days will be decisive. The combination of high-intensity military operations, humanitarian crisis, and energy market instability makes this one of the most consequential conflicts in recent memory. Lives hang in the balance, economies are under threat, and regional stability is at risk of unraveling. As the world watches, the decisions of leaders, the resilience of civilian populations, and the effectiveness of international mediation will shape not only the outcome of the war, but also the future of a region whose security and prosperity are intertwined with the global community. Every action now, military, political, or humanitarian, could tip the scales toward either escalation or resolution, and the consequences will reverberate far beyond the Middle East, affecting energy, trade, and security worldwide.